Here is Van Dieman's Ruby Slippers, and this is a red with a silver shimmer, which is pretty cool because it can show like a pink because of the shimmer sometimes, but it is definitely a red. It is very consistent in tone and shimmer as we change pages. It also doesn't shade as I can see. I do have to say that at the end, or nib and pen segment, you'll see that I have to prime the pen and the ink had some trouble keeping up. The pen wasn't clogged though. On non-fountain pen friendly paper, it is aggressive, getting deep into the paper, and it does feather a bit, sadly. I enjoy shimmer inks, and I enjoyed this one, but I can find red shimmer inks without the aggressive. Since I see this frequently as used on non-fountain pen friendly paper, I'm going to go ahead and pass on this.
The pen for today is a Visconti Van Gogh. Now that we know my opinion on this ink, let's see how we got there by looking at the first writing sample done on Clairfontaine.
This is not a pink tone that we're seeing. This is red with silver shimmer. And depending on the light, you see silver or you see red. Straight up into the camera, it looks like I'm seeing a bit more of a pink. It is not. It does not feather. It does not spread. It does not shade. It shimmers, not shade. It looks very good on this paper. Really not having a problem whether what I'm seeing is the silver or the red. It's looking good and easy to read on this bright white paper. Looking at the back of the page, you can see a couple areas that the ink was a little more aggressive into the paper. Now, this is not something that's normally a problem for this paper, but I've come across a few inks that it does do it. Tends to show that it's a little bit more aggressive. It did not bleed through touching the page underneath, and the ghosting's not horrible. Just be aware of that spotting.
Van Dieman's makes more than just this one ink. So let's take a look at a few other inks from Van Dieman's.
Here is Van Dieman's Hanging Lake. Here is Van Dieman's Eclipse. Here is Van Dieman's Bass Strait Cobalt Blue. Here is Van Dieman's Midnight Sky.
The second writing sample is done in a Portage Reporter notebook.
Here we can see the same tone as the Clairfontaine red with plenty of shimmer on top of it. No feathering, no spread, no shading, lots of shimmer. Really consistent all over it. Easy to read on this page. Really nice performance. Is this my go-to for it? No, but can I still see some of that shimmer? Absolutely. Looking at the back of the page, there is a lot of spots the ink got very deep into the paper, showing that aggression. Now, the ghosting's not a whole bunch. The ghosting's not a real problem. I'd write on the back of the page. It's the spotting that tends to occur that really brings concern and would probably stop me from writing on the back of the page.
There's a lot to be learned by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down to immediately put into water to show the separation of those colors, making the ink. Now the one on the right is marked with a D. This is allowed to dry for 10 minutes before it's put into water. The third writing sample is done in a national brand Steno notebook.
Here we have the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does have tiny bits of feathering that you don't have to think too hard to find, like on Think on the third line. It just happens in a lot of the written spaces, like written on the first line. I see tiny feathers, really tiny. There's no spread. The shimmer is there, very present. It is not being affected by the tone of the paper, meaning we have an opaque ink. This is just not going to be a best paper for this, though what we're seeing is not bad in and of itself. Looking at the back of the page, you see that it gets very deep into the page in a lot of spotting. None of those spots bled through touching the page underneath. The ghosting's under control. I'd be willing to write on the back of the page with the ghosting. It's the spotting that would draw concerns for me.
Resistance tests are done to see how well this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. Now, the smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. In the upper left, you can see where there is highlighter. In the upper right, that is pen flush. The lower left has a 1/3 bleach solution, and the lower right has plain old water. The next writing sample is done in a Rhodia notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. It does not feather, does not spread, does not shade, does shimmer just as well as it did on the Clairfontaine. It does stand out against the quad rule, making this a good ink to use if you normally use quad rule paper. Looking at the back of the page, there's no real ghosting, not a real problem going on. There's only a couple of spots that I see that ink get a little bit deeper into the page. And I know I'm nitpicking here, but these are some good papers that I'm nitpicking on. That's just a concerning thing to happen. Could you write back here? Yes. Would I write back here? Yes.
With over 1,000 inks reviewed, let's take a look at a few more red inks.
Here is Califolio Rubis. Here is Noodler's Nikita. Here is Robert Oster Rubine.
Here is Twisby Red.
All of the inks that you just saw have a review here on the channel. Now, the next writing sample is done in a composition lab notebook.
Here we get the same tone as the Clairfontaine. No feather, no spread, no shading. It still shimmers, even on this paper that normally eats that stuff up. Normally stops all of those extra qualities about an ink coming through. If you're a student that really wants to use a shimmer ink in your lab notebook, this would be a pretty good one to go with. And it stands out against the quad rule here also as well as it did on the Rhodia. Looking at the back of the page, we get no bleeding and no ghosting.
While it's nice to see inks that are in the same color family, I prefer to find inks that complement the color on the page.
Here is Robert Oster Blue Black. Here is Birmingham Pen Company Jeff Goldblum Independence Gray. Here is Montegrappa Blue. Here is Pilot Namiki Black.
The best way you can support this or any channel that you like watching is to alert the retailer of where you saw the product at time of purchase. Now, the last writing sample is done on 20-pound copy paper.
Here we can see that the tone is just a little bit lighter than it was on the Clairfontaine. Now, it doesn't feather. It does have a tiny bit of spread. The spread is manageable. It's not shading. It is shimmering. I definitely see the shimmer coming through in no problems with list, the 1, 2, 3, digits, many. A lot of places the shimmer's coming through in no problem. In Element, I see it start mostly without it, but then it picks up the shimmer during the E into the NT. Looking at the back of the page, there is some light spotting. None of it came through touching the page underneath, so no bleed. There's very light ghosting. Could you write on the back of the page? Maybe. I likely wouldn't. I think that shows this is a great ink to use on this paper.
So what nib and pen do I think are going to give the best writing experience with this ink?
The Visconti Van Gogh has a medium flow, medium nib and gives a good tone and plentiful shading. Off camera, I tried this in a dry stub to try to tone down the aggression. Nope. But did we get the same tone and amount of shimmer? Yes. I don't think the pen or nib or flow really affect the performance of this ink, so we do have a dealer's choice. I will say, though, to be very aware of the paper that you're choosing to use.